All right, my name is Meghan Bratkovich. I'm new faculty in foreign language ESOL, and my work is about improving education for English language learners. I'm especially interested in math and science and how we teach disciplinary discourse and academic varieties of language to linguistically diverse students. To share a funny anecdote about how I came to this work, I was having dinner with a friend of mine during my doc program, and we were serving this food, seen here. My friend was an international student from Africa, spoke English very, very well, and about halfway through dinner, she says, "Please pass the roast cow." So I understood exactly what my friend meant with this request. It was a syntactically accurate sentence that correctly named the animal that our dinner came from. But for an American English speaker, roast cow just sounds weird. We eat chicken and fish just fine, but we don't eat pig and we don't eat cow. So I was admittedly feeling a little bit queasy about being reminded that I had a piece of roasted cow speared at the end of my fork. And the language teacher in me was thinking, what a teachable moment. And the human in me was thinking, don't lose another friend because of grammar. So I had a couple of options about how to address this roast cow request. I could simply pass the roast beef and say nothing, because the message had been clearly conveyed and achieved its goal of moving a plate of food. I could also say, sure, here's the roast cow, thereby using and legitimizing her language as I passed her the plate of roast beef. I could also comment on the effect that this language had on me as an American English speaker, issuing a vague, gross, before passing the dish. And another possibility is, sure, here's the roast beef, simply rephrasing and recasting her request into language that's more appropriate for American dinner parties. I could also say something like, we actually say roast beef instead of roast cow, even though you're right, beef is meat from cows, using and explaining the accepted form. Or I could totally nerd out and say, we actually say roast beef because after the Norman invasion, we used French-based culinary terms to name the food boeuf that would have been eaten by rich people who would have spoken French, while leaving a German-derived name for cow, Kuh, that would have been used referring only to the animal raised by German-speaking farmers who couldn't actually afford to eat the meat of the animal they raised. So you know how we associate French food with being fancy? That started almost 1,000 years ago. So any of these responses, and likely countless others, could all be considered appropriate, and all are forms of teaching. Teaching can ignore, it can evaluate, it can both implicitly and explicitly correct. It can explain what something is and explain how something came to be. And this is where my work lives, sort of in the spaces between the I understand what you mean and the but that's not how we say it. And this pronoun shift is really important. I understand, but that's not how we say it. And that we is really meaningful. That we is the royal we, historically when a king would speak on behalf of his kingdom or his subjects. And in content area teaching, this looks like a content area teacher speaking on behalf of a discipline. So the teacher is serving as an evaluator for language that is acceptable, not just in the context of school, but language that's acceptable for the discipline. And for teachers, that's not how we say it can often come out in some version of, this isn't clear, or this doesn't sound right, or I understand what they mean, but this isn't scientific writing. So academic and disciplinary language becomes a bit like the obscenity threshold test back in the 60s, where Potter Stewart, a Supreme Court justice, famously said of obscenity, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. And that's how a lot of content area teachers handle academic and disciplinary language. I would like to see more content area teachers be able to explain and unpack the language of their disciplines, to go beyond identifying language as either consistent or deviant from the norm, and explain to students, their English learners in particular, how we do say it and why we say it that way, and bring them into disciplinary discourse. And what's great is that a lot of teachers have the same intuition about language in their content area that I had about roast beef. They know when something's off, but they can't necessarily describe what's wrong, and they can't necessarily teach it in ways that would allow their students, their English learners in particular, to construct appropriate language themselves. because constructing a good argument in science is different from constructing a good argument in math, which is different from constructing a good argument in history or literature. And a lot of English learners haven't developed their intuition in English for what sounds right yet, let alone what sounds right in a specific content area. So I want to try to leverage the intuition of content area teachers of what sounds right in their discipline and flesh that out in their teaching so that disciplinary language isn't either reduced to content-specific vocabulary or otherwise relegated to a hidden curriculum for students to pick up on their own. Because if disciplinary language proficiency is about students implicitly picking it up, we will continue to disadvantage linguistically diverse students and fall short of equitable education. I don't expect everyone to know about beef and the Norman invasion, but I do expect teachers to be able to articulate what it means to be clear in their content area context and describe some of the values that shape how language is used in that context so that linguistically diverse students can become part of the we who uses disciplinary language. In short, I want to make sure that English learners aren't only held to the standard of, I know what you mean. I know what you mean might be good enough if the goal of school is to finish school. But if the goal of school is preparation to enter college or a career, we also have to teach them how we say it. Which means preparing teachers to unpack their discipline's language both for and with their future students. Questions?